So, have you ever felt like learning grammar was just, well, just naming things?
Yeah, like identifying nouns and verbs, and you kind of wonder.
Right. And you wonder if it actually helped you speak or write any better. Turns out, you're definitely not alone there.
Mm-hmm.
We're diving into some really fascinating material shared with us today that tackles exactly this feeling.
It's a great source. A really powerful critique, actually, of how we often think about language teaching and, learning.
Okay, so what are we looking at?
It's a text from back in 2007 by Antunes.
Hmm.
It's got this two-part title, An Analysis of Grammar, Far Short of the Text, and then a suggestion for a program much beyond grammar.
Far short of the text,
Mm.
much beyond grammar. Okay, I like that contrast. So this deep dive is really about unpacking that perspective, right?
Exactly. What Antunes sees as maybe wrong or at least limited with the traditional approach.
And what's this alternative, this beyond grammar idea?
Yeah. What could language learning really be about?
Okay, let's unpack this.
So Antunes points to what they call a fundamental pitfall, maybe a deep misunderstanding, you know, in how grammar is commonly taught.
Misunderstanding. How so?
Well, the core argument is basically that just hunting for grammatical labels, this is a noun, that's an adverb, this is the predicate, the whole exercise,
Hmm.
is mistakenly treated as if it's the same thing as studying grammar in a way that actually builds like real skill,
Hmm.
real competence in speaking, reading, writing.
Right, okay. So being able to stick a label on a word,
Mhm.
that doesn't automatically mean you know how to use the language effectively.
Precisely. Antunes argues this heavy focus, this concentration just on naming things, it only gives you a superficial view of language itself.
Just scratching the surface.
Exactly. Now, the author is careful here. They say this method isn't like the only reason language teaching has problems.
Okay, fair enough.
But they really emphasize it's had a very significant weight, a really big, maybe even outsized influence on how we approach language.
And to really get a handle on this source uses an example, right? Something concrete.
Yeah, a brilliant one. It looks at a stanza from a poem. It's by Milton Nascimento and Fernando Brand.
Okay.
And they lay out the kinds of questions you'd probably get in a, let's say, very traditional grammar class looking at this poem.
Like what?
Oh, how many verses, how many strophes,
Yep.
find the abstract nouns,
Okay.
or classify a word like rosa, which means something like countryside or field. It's a common, compound, primitive, derived, that kind of thing.
Right, the classification game.
Exactly. And after listing these typical questions, Antunes asks this really pointed question. It almost sounds, I don't know, sad. Where is the understanding of the poem? Where did it go?
Wow. That hits hard, doesn't it?
It really does,
Hmm.
because it just highlights that you can answer all those questions, get them all right,
Yeah, get an A+ on the grammar quiz.
and still have like absolutely zero grasp of what the poem is actually about, what it feels like, why the poets made the choices they did. The grammar stuff didn't connect you to the text itself.
So that's the far short of the text part.
That's it.
So what's the alternative then? Instead of those labeling questions, what does Antunes suggest for that same poem? They frame it as much more significant, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the suggestions are fascinating. Things like exploring the function of opposite ideas in the poem. What's the actual effect?
Okay, function, effect.
Or what happens when the word quiero, I want, gets repeated? What does that do to the feeling, the intensity?
Ah, okay. Looking at repetition not just as a feature, but for its impact.
Right. Or how the lines are structured. Maybe it's similar. Maybe they contrast that parallelism syntactically or semantically. How does that build meaning?
So structure equals meaning.
Hmm. And why the intense focus on on the I? How is meaning being created through, figures of speech, metaphor, metonymy? What does it mean when the speaker says, I want a house of good brick? What's the symbolism there?
Those questions feel completely different. They feel like they're actually asking you to engage with the poem, to think.
They really are. They invite you in.
Hmm.
And this gets right to the core of Antunes' whole critique.
Mm-hmm.
These alternative questions, they push you way beyond just the literal dictionary meaning of the words. They get you towards the poem's deeper significance, its nuances.
So they're focused on communication, on intent, on how the text is built.
Yes, not just its isolated little grammatical part.
Okay, so if just focusing on the grammar parts is, well, missing the point, being far short of the text, what's the big proposal? What should we be doing?
The central idea is pretty clear. The text itself should be the main object of study. the primary focus.
The text, not the grammar rule in isolation.
Exactly. Grammar is still vital, don't get me wrong. And Antunes isn't saying ditch grammar, but his study has to be directly linked, fundamentally connected to understanding actual texts, real communication.
So you learn the grammar through the text to understand the text better.
That's the idea. Antunes uses the phrase, the text, not grammar, should be the center of the program.
The center. I like that.
Yeah, think of the text as the ground or the stones, as the author puts it. You don't just analyze the stones individually in a pile.
Yeah.
You look at how they fit together to build the whole structure, the whole message.
Like studying bricks versus understanding how they make a wall, or even a whole house with meaning and purpose.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The author feels there's this imperious need, an urgent need, really, to get past just superficially analyzing word forms and basic sentence structures.
Just naming the parts.
Yeah, calling that focus on naming things an illusion, even a sterile exercise. And, interestingly, saying it actually hides a lot.
Hides things. Like what?
Well, the author even suggests it could hide outdated or prejudiced attitudes that sometimes get embedded in rigid rules taught completely out of context.
Wow, okay. So it's not just ineffective, it could be problematic.
Potentially. The main point is understanding function in actual use is key, not just knowing the names.
This is where it gets really practical then, because the source doesn't just critique, right? It offers ideas for what this program much beyond grammar could actually look like.
Yes, and it's quite detailed. We can't cover everything, but just to give you a flavor.
Yeah, give us some examples.
Okay, so instead of just, say, identifying all the pronouns in a passage,
Right.
you'd analyze why specific pronouns were chosen. How do they help the text flow? How do they create connections or maybe distance?
So the choice and its effect.
Exactly. Or you'd look at sentence structures. Why did the author put things together this way? How does this structure help achieve the intended purpose, the effect they wanted?
Okay, linking grammar choices to the writer's or speaker's intention.
Precisely. And you'd explore how meaning gets built through other things, too, like repetition for emphasis, parallel structures for rhythm or comparison, figures of speech, metaphor, irony, you name it.
Even punctuation.
Absolutely. How does punctuation guide the reader? Create pauses, signal tone, and you'd look at different types of texts.
How so?
Well, how does language work differently in a news report versus, say, a poem? Or a formal email versus a casual text message? You look at genre and context.
Right, language isn't one size fits all.
Definitely not. And even vocabulary study changes. It's not just definitions. It's about how new words get formed, how meanings shift over time, neologisms, borrowings, or how language varies between regions or social groups, dialectal variations.
It sounds like studying language is this like living, breathing thing that people actually use.
That is exactly the goal. It's about exploring language in discursive activity, which just means language in action being used to do things.
Persuade, inform, connect.
All of it. It gives you this integrative view where grammar, vocabulary, structure, context, it all comes together to create meaning. It's not just a checklist of rules.
Okay, so let's bring this home for the listener. Why should this shift matter to you? Maybe you're learning a language, maybe you teach it, maybe you're just, curious.
Well, because this kind of deeper analysis, it helps you develop real communicative competence. That's the big goal.
Communicative competence, what does that mean in practice?
It means understanding not just the literal words on the page or that you hear, but the intent behind them, the context they're in, all those subtle layers of meaning. It helps you become a much more skilled, more perceptive reader, listener, speaker, writer.
So it's like going from just decoding words to actually understanding the whole message, and maybe even the person sending it.
Exactly right. The source uses this great phrase saying, this approach helps us decipher that statement and the why of that desire, getting to the heart of what language is actually doing.
And I imagine it makes learning feel less like a chore.
Oh, definitely. Antunes suggests it makes learning way more engaging, less monotonous. It encourages you to actually explore, to discover things for yourself. It sharpens the desire to learn rather than killing it with dry rules.
Makes sense. But is it easy to make this shift?
Well, there's the challenge.
Yeah.
The source is realistic. It notes that moving to this approach requires both teachers and learners to take a risk, basically.
With risk.
Yeah, to move beyond the established comfortable norms.
Right.
To experiment with actually using language, engaging in the exercise of verbal activity.
And the source mentions that some teachers might even feel like grammar is useless, but they still teach it the old way.
Right. It highlights that strange disconnect. Some might think, oh, grammar doesn't really help, but they keep teaching the naming conventions because, well, that's how it's often done.
But the real value isn't throwing grammar out.
No, absolutely not.
Mm.
It's understanding grammar through its function, seeing how it works within real language, within texts, within actual conversations.
Seeing it as the system that makes all that rich communication possible in context.
That's it perfectly.
So, wrapping this up, the big takeaway from this deep dive into Antoon's work seems to be the real power in shifting our focus, moving away from just naming the bits and pieces of language towards understanding how language actually works in action,
Well,
within text, within communication,
right.
going from the superficial label to the truly significant function.
Absolutely. It's a profound shift in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a final thought to leave you with, drawing from that idea in the source of exploring language as a deeply human endeavor.
Okay.
Just consider this.
Uh-huh.
How much more might you learn about language, about communication, about people, really, if you started approaching every text you read, every conversation you have, not just as a collection of rules to identify,
Right.
but as an opportunity to uncover the intent, the context, the connection being made, or maybe even missed. What fascinating discoveries, as Antunes might put it, could you make about how language truly shapes our world?